Hey guys, in the middle of editing my latest story about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, I saw some new filings in the Russell Laffitte case, so I want to do a really quick update about that, and it comes with some questions. This is Legal Updates with Cassidy. Russell Laffitte doesn't want his trial anywhere near his alleged victims because it's not fair to him. Welcome. Russell Laffitte has now hired not one, but two new attorneys to help supplement his law team. To start with, a name you might find familiar, Sean C. Kent of the Kent law firm in Manning, South Carolina. The reason it might be familiar to you is Sean is also Buster's attorney in his lawsuit against everyone. So he filed his notice of appearance February 3rd. Additionally, we have Jada T. Wilson, who's in the same law firm as Mark Time Waster Moore. She has been clerking in this law firm and has now become an associate. She's very well educated with a bachelor in health sciences and a master of science in community engaged medicine, and also a graduate of the University of South Carolina School of Law. Jada, you could do better than this. Additionally, we have a motion, and of course, it's a very lengthy motion, 23 pages, because when it comes to Mark Moore, why say it in 4 or 5 pages when you can say it in 23 pages, right? This motion, as expected, has to do with the jury panel. They're saying that the case is simply too well known to comprise a jury of people only from the Low Country. They list 3 facts of why that's so. 1, he's an alleged co-conspirator of Alex Murdaugh, and I hate that we have to go back to using the word alleged again. We were able to say co-conspirator because he was found guilty, he was convicted, he was imprisoned, but he was able to get a new trial, so we have to go back to these words, alleged. 2, his former position as CEO of Palmetto State Bank, and 3, the amount of pervasive, negative pre- and post-trial publicity generated by this and related cases in the Low Country region. He was pretty fortunate to be the first case tried, because at the point he had his first federal trial, so little was known about this case. He got away with actually a pretty light sentence. And I think after seeing what went down with Alex's sentencing, and seeing Corey just lose terribly in the Nautilus case, he's probably scared. I feel this man is going to be found guilty again, and this time, he's not going to get the light sentence that he had last time. I think he's starting to fear that a little bit. He's probably going to wish he stayed with his original trial, but we'll see. But Time Waster Moore is saying that Russell's case should be the exception and not the rule because good cause is demonstrated, for this exception being necessary to protect Mr. Laffitte's rights to a fair trial. And I just love how these guys who allegedly did these horrible things to orphans, quadriplegics, Pamela Pinckney, to this day still getting surgeries for her injuries, had the grievous loss of her son. And I can say this because this is fact. Russell Laffitte signed documents as if Hakeem was still alive after Hakeem's passing. And this man wants to talk about fair. So in the background, he talks about the areas in which jurors are pulled for different cases. He gives us a little map of the different counties involved, where these crimes happened or were alleged to have happened, where Russell's from, where the Murdaugh law firm is, and where these banks are. Then he brings the facts that we've already talked about, Alex's financial crime spree, the conviction of the murders of his wife and son, and that all of this reporting has been unprecedented in the history of the state, saying that the media attention has been both unprecedented and unabated, continuing to this date. Yes, we are still talking about it because it was horrible and it's not over yet. Justice has not been fully served yet because the cases have all been fought in court. But none of these guys who took part in these crimes wants to take responsibility or consequences for what they did. That's why these cases are still ongoing. And as long as they remain ongoing, they will remain being talked about and reported on. So they say Area C, the area where the jury pool would be taken from, that these folks might come with preconceived notions as to the guilt of Mr. Laffitte and his purported collusion with others involved in the media. I think Russell has had not nearly enough reported on about his hand in these things. We don't see him mentioned, very little if at all, in the documentaries. I've expressed so many times before just how little he's been reported on and how unfair I think that is, given his alleged role in this whole conspiracy. Yes, there's been extensive reporting on Alex, but even Corey, not nearly enough was mentioned about Corey's hand in these things. So these guys love to fuss about being looped in with Alex, but at the same time, they want to benefit by having been looped in with Alex. But the truth is, many more people know Alex Murdaugh's name compared with how many people know Russell Laffitte or even Corey. Then it goes into how much the local news agencies and newspapers have reported on him, and then mentions podcasts and social media discussions. Page 9 goes on mentioning that there are at least 13 books that have been written about Mr. Murdaugh and the Murdaugh saga. But seriously, how about going through those books and showing us how many mentions are in said books about Russell? Let's try that one, Mark. And then he gets really vicious, specifically naming Mandy Matney and Liz Farrell. He then goes through listing different articles that have been written or reported on about him. We see some well-known names here. Melissa Rademacher. She's been one of the main local reporters that has attended the court sessions. At the end of the day, gives good reviews on what happened throughout the day, especially in the federal trials where there's no camera footage. I showed clips from her when I covered the Nautilus trial because she was the only local source who was reporting on that trial. We also see Drew Tripp gets a mention, as well as Liz Farrell again. And then we get to this nonsense, and yes, I say nonsense, analysis about media coverage. He puts this in an exhibit, so I'm going to wait and tell you what I'm talking about when we're looking at that. But he's listing out how many stories have come from specific areas. So keep that in mind for now till we get to that exhibit. But through these several pages, he keeps mentioning articles and things that have been said. So then we get to arguments where he kind of consolidates all of these thoughts. The introduction, he talks about the interest again. Part 2, he talks about the Sixth Amendment and the right to an impartial jury. And that if he doesn't have an impartial jury, it will prevent a fair trial, a basic requirement of due process. Part 3, mentions that Rule 18 gives judges discretion to select the specific trial location within the district, though the normal thing is that venue is traditionally fixed in the district where the crime happened. Then he lays out the criteria for deciding these sorts of things: the location of the defendant, location of witnesses, location of events likely to be an issue, location of documents and records, disruption of the defendant's business, expense to the parties, location of counsel, relative accessibility of trial, docket conditions in each district, and any other specific element which might affect the transfer, and then the court must strike a balance, determining which of these factors are of greatest importance. He says that judges in the district have previously granted requests for a centralized jury panel in cases that received less public attention than the case at bar. But again, he's using the Alex Murdaugh case in a way that I don't believe fully extends to him. To be fair, when it comes to Alex, the biggest part of that story is the murder of Maggie and Paul. That's the trial that was attended by people who lined up around the courthouse hoping to get a seat. The documentaries, they dwell on the boat crash and the murders, with some mention of finances, not specific to Corey, not specific to Russell. He's overplaying the fame of Russell. There are probably many people out there who know about Alex, know about the murders, know about the boat crash, and have no idea who Russell Laffitte is, or remember the Palmetto State Bank name. When Alex showed up to face his financial crimes, were there people lined up everywhere outside trying to get into the courthouse? No. There were times when Alex, Corey, and Russell, all three had a hearing scheduled at the same hearing. Even then, the courthouse was not full because it wasn't about the murder, it was about the financial crimes. so much less is known about even Alex's financial crimes. He makes another 0.5, even though it's the same point he's been making. A statewide jury panel is necessary to ensure a fair and impartial trial for Mr. Laffitte. And the good cause has been shown. Now, when you're talking about statewide, is he asking that jurors travel from the far-flung edges of South Carolina to make sure that Russell gets a fair trial? A trial that's probably going to take at least a week, maybe 2. And you want to disrupt people's lives from the way out corners of South Carolina to make Russell happy? And then there's a bunch more repeating himself over and over again, talking about this extensive news coverage. And then we get to 6, where he wants the court to consider Greenville, Columbia, or Florence. Then he says that witnesses from the Hampton area, the drive from Hampton to Columbia consumes about the same amount of time as a trip to Columbia. I think one of these he means Charleston, instead of saying Columbia twice. 4 of the 7 lawyers who are expected to try this case live in Columbia. Lawyers for the Parker Law Group and Palmetto State Bank also reside in Columbia. Upstate jurors who are summoned might have to travel to Charleston. So he's trying to say it wouldn't be any more of a hardship to relocate to Columbia instead of Charleston. And then he leaves out the part that the judge and the government attorneys would have to come all the way from Charleston. Then we get to this exhibit, and I say this is just pointless. He has this little chart about media coverage. He lists out all these counties, all these areas, and the media coverage in each of them. Now, I mean, look at the Laffitte numbers compared to Alex's. This is why I said he's using Alex as an excuse, because Russell has featured very small compared to Alex. Just look at the differences in Russell's puny little numbers. So if he were to take this chart by itself, just Laffitte's side, look at those little numbers. A judge would just laugh at that. So he has to put the Murdaugh coverage there. But Murdaugh coverage doesn't equal Russell coverage. So take the Murdaugh one away completely. It's completely irrelevant. Even if we look at Alex's, and there's all these places that have 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And then there's these other places like Charleston and Beaufort and Greenville. Why are those numbers so high? Because if you take any story and put the media coverage up, this is how the graph is going to look. There are not news agencies in every one of these places. That's why they're 0. And in each of these little places, they have access to the same media coverage that's put out in these bigger cities or counties, because those are the newspapers that get distributed in these places that don't have newspapers of their own or don't have news channels of their own. It's downright silly. So take any area. Take Detroit, for example. Right downtown Detroit, you're going to have several news agencies. Something big happens, they're all going to go. They're all going to film, they're all going to interview, they're all going to report. All of the surrounding areas that are smaller, more rural, don't have their own TV news station, don't have their own local newspaper. What do they watch? What do they read? They read the stuff that comes out of Detroit, because that's what's available. It's the same here. You see this list here of Kershaw, Lancaster, Lawrence, all 0, 0, 0. What do you think these people read? They don't have media coverage. But they read and watch the stuff that comes out of these bigger places like Charleston. So that's why I'm saying this chart is worthless. Because these people with 0 media coverage, they're simply reading or watching the stuff that comes out of the places that have bigger media coverage and news stations. So everything about his little report is so flawed. It's another tactic to waste time. And it's something that he can use later in his appeal if this doesn't get approved by the judge and Russell gets convicted again. He's going to be writing the South Carolina Supreme Court again saying, well, hey, this wasn't fair. I asked the judge to change venue and he didn't do it. But in fact, his arguments are worthless, in my opinion. And these coverage lists that he's provided to the court prove that. The biggest number that Russell got covered in was Charleston, and it was only 960. That's just because Charleston is the biggest news agency. And even at that, that's not a lot of coverage. Look at Alex in Charleston, over 12,000. And Russell, not even 1,000? And nothing else even comes close to that. The next highest number is Greenville, 220. So personally, I don't find this a very convincing motion. This is just once again trying to make a victim of a man with a long list of alleged victimization of other people. And these 2 new attorneys that have been hired, I just want to know how much Russell's paying for all of this. And how much are these attorneys draining from this fund that no longer has money that can go into it because Russell hasn't worked in years? How much are they draining from this limited fund that they're taking away from what might go to the victims? Russell hasn't even had his state trials yet. And by the time any of that can happen, these attorneys will have bled all of the money dry. And it's just gross. This is Cassidy O'Connell saying stay well and stay tuned.